Forward. Awesome. So as part of our video spotlight series, we're highlighting various moguls on the continent. Today we have with us here Mr. Steve Cashin, who is the founder and CEO of the Pan-African Capital Group, PACG. PACG bridges the gap between international finance and promising enterprises in emerging and frontier markets by making direct investments in financial services companies and participating in private equity funds and advising on structured lending, corporate finance, and other transactions in sub-Saharan Africa. Mr. Cashin, thank you so much for your time.
It's a real pleasure to be here, Esther. Thank you.
Awesome. So one of the questions that we wanted to ask you was, what inspired you to start the Pan-African Capital Group?
Well, Esther, I guess the obvious answer is Georgetown. Georgetown was the base. Georgetown was the only place I wanted to go to college. And Georgetown still is very much part of my life. And I think that the commitment to others, the service to others, and the opportunity that can bring to one, it was an important takeaway that I got from Georgetown and has been the foundation of much of what I've done since. When I left Georgetown, I immediately joined the Peace Corps, having been brought up by one of the first employees of USAID and having grown up across Africa. Africa was kind of in my blood. I knew I wanted to work across the continent, but at the time, I kind of only understood the development world. I began working in the development world, Peace Corps, Catholic Relief Services, but it really wasn't floating my boat. And I saw opportunities and brains across the continent, and increasingly felt that there were opportunities for both profitability and growth for the continent writ large in the private sector. I was really lucky. My first boss was a woman who was incredibly demanding, didn't have any time for worrying about what time of day it was, called me whenever she felt like it, and felt that it was important to be on a plane to follow every opportunity at any moment. Her name was Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And my life has kind of been linked to her ever since. So even if I were to get involved in a transaction that I think is appropriate, I have kind of a guardian angel on my shoulder telling me whether I'm right or wrong all the time. And I think that the link between my first boss, as well as my parents, as well as my Georgetown education, has given me a prism of looking at Africa, which focuses not only on the opportunity, but on the environment in which I'm working. One of the things that you'll see throughout all of the investments Pan-Africa makes is that we build on national talent and national opportunities. That doesn't mean that we don't utilize world-class resources, but we integrate those world-class resources on the foundations of successful teams who are successful in the environments in which they work. And as you well know, you can be successful in Arizona and a total failure in Ohio. The same is true across the many different countries in Africa. And having the strong relationships and the strong foundation of individuals who are successful in those markets, I think is an important foundation moving forward. We are beginning to look at the whole AI and IT space across the continent to enhance the value of the financial institutions in which we have invested and And it's been very interesting to me. On the one hand, it's incredibly exciting to see the new, young, well-educated people of African descent investing heavily in the tech space. In fact, it's been astounding watching the tech space in the past couple of years, where in the venture space in tech, Africa has received more capital than virtually anywhere in the world. My concern, and there are, Partech just came out with a recent Africa Tech VC report, and the numbers are astounding. 5.2 billion invested in 681 rounds for tech investment across the continent last year. That's a long way, baby, from where we started.
Absolutely.
My concern is ensuring that those investments are building on the skill bases and the environments that exist on the continent today, and not trying to layer them by themselves, because we need to ensure that we use what is already on the ground in order to leverage what is on the ground. But I think it's an exciting time. I think that Pan-Africa's commitment to investing in the continent has borne fruit in the past 30-odd years. And I think it's evolving, and evolving really fast.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Based on your investment thesis in Pan-African Capital Group, what is your perspective, and also all your investment experience, about the perception of risk on the continent? Is the brand of the African continent being high risk, flawed, exaggerated, or would you say is a fair assessment? And we all know that risk is a very important concept for both lenders and equity investors. And during the pandemic, which was quite recent, so we saw about 10 African countries get your credit ratings downgraded, which further increases the perception of risk on the continent. So do you believe these risks of investing in enterprises in Africa is tantamount to investing in the West, or do you believe that truly the continent is fairly assessed as risky?
Esther, it's a multifaceted question, but let me start with sovereign risk. And I appreciate your asking, because in 1998, I was a senior advisor, senior consultant at CSIS. Just as I was beginning the precursor to Pan-Africa, Modern Africa Fund. I worked with a woman, the head of the CSIS Africa program, Connie Freeman, and a young woman named Carissa Graff, with whom I still work today, on doing a conference on the introduction of credit ratings into the African continent. In 1998, no country in Africa had a credit rating. Esther, the IMF refused to come. They refused to come because they said it was too risky for Africans to consider credit ratings. Oh. The US, to its credit, and I have to actually hand the credit specifically to Walter Kansteiner, who was the Assistant Secretary of State at the time, not only participated in the conference, but coming out of the conference, committed the funding for the first 5 credit ratings in Africa. We're 25 years down the road from 1998. And if we look at your examples of over the pandemic of 10 countries losing, having reductions in their credit ratings, it's the data is irrefutable. That in order for a country in Africa to move from a B to a BB, it's 6 times less likely than anywhere else in the world. Also, if you were to look at purely the quantitative data on sovereign credit ratings, as opposed to the qualitative overlay, countries would be rated higher than they are with the qualitative overlay.
Mhm.
It's incredibly frustrating. Why? I think politics weighs more heavily in the decision-making process of a credit rating in Africa than it does in the United States or in Europe. Is that fair? Probably not. I think we have to use the same systems.
Mhm.
Number two, the development finance community plays a outsized role as it relates to the data across the African continent, and makes it very difficult for a national Ministry of Finance to defend numbers because other people have the numbers and say their numbers are better than the National Treasury or Finance Ministry of Finance. There are more people at the table for an African credit rating than there are for the US credit rating, or more issues because of the development finance community. Now, we needed the development finance community. The development finance community is the foundation for growth in much of Africa, but the transition has been really tough. And I'm a believer that they need to do more to integrate Africa into the international credit environment rather than block it. And so, you know, I'm watching what's going on in Ghana today. Ghana has just grown leaps and bounds in the past 4 or 5 years, has been very active in the international credit rating and credit markets, and is being hammered because of squabbles in the Ghana parliament. Not because of actual numbers, not because of missing payments. It's because of squabbles, and that's qualitative. That's not quantitative. And I don't. And listen, look at what happened in the U.S. over the past 5 years. If we can talk about squabbles, we're the king of squabbles. So I have real concerns as it relates to the international community's view on the one hand, and on the other hand, I'm really excited because of the numbers I mentioned earlier of $5 billion going into Africa Tech, of initiatives for regional trade across the continent, for recognition that infrastructure needs to be regional, not country specific. So there are a lot of counterbalancing efforts, but at the end of the day, Africa's being judged on a different basis than other international markets, and that has to stop.
Awesome.
Now, let me add one thing outside of the credit ratings. We've seen how many coups in Africa in the last how many months? It's complicated. The Sahel has become an ungovernable environment. And I think the global community needs to come together to address that. On the one hand, the arms war, which emanated from the north of Africa, was only exacerbated by the drug war that came from the south, and the resources required to address it just were not invested. On the other hand, the judiciary across the continent, they need to pull up their socks, and they can. And you go country by country by country by country, and you look at the judiciary and you say, it's unbelievably fragile. And so there are things on the continent that can be done. The flip side is, when we're judging the continent, let's judge it on numbers, not on perceptions.
Love that. I think that's a very big key takeaway from this is perceptions. If you're doing it qualitatively, it might be not very objective. So I think that's a very, very good point. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for sharing all about what is going on in the continent and your investment thesis in the Pan-African Capital Group, and what great work you guys are doing on the continent. So I'll stop the recording.
Well, it's a real pleasure to join you today. And I am thrilled to see the number of young African nationals at Georgetown via SACSA. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Let me stop the recording.